This is Big Podcast.
It's Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. David Hooper with you. BigPodcast.com is the site. This episode, the audio edition of my weekly newsletter, that is called Big Podcast Insider. It is at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. You can go there to follow along, get the links, and get more info that is not covered here. But I'm going to cover a lot here on this issue. My number one dream guest, but not anymore. Spotify is going to clone podcasters' voices and translate them into other languages. The difference between interested and obsessed. Google Podcast is shutting down. How to edit with your ears. Book your podcast interviews with a point. Podcaster equals audio engineer. Also some classified ads for you, things that I think will help you with your podcast, spreading your message. That's what this podcast is about, spreading your message, getting more people interested in your podcast, making money with your podcast. This episode is brought to you by Riverside.fm, the leading platform to record studio quality, remote podcast and video. I do a lot of interviews remotely. People never know. Why? Because of tools like Riverside.fm. It's going to make you sound like you're in the same room, even if you're across the country or on the other side of the world. It records locally on each participant's computer and uploads to the cloud. That lets you keep the highest quality audio and video. It does video as well for your podcast, for your YouTube channel, whatever you're going to use it for. Here's how to connect to the guest. You simply send a web link. The guest opens it up in the Chrome browser. You and the guest are together in Riverside Studio, and you're going to sound amazing. You can check it out for free. They'll give you a couple hours to try it. That's going to be enough for an interview or two. It's Riverside.fm, and I've got a discount code for you. Go to Riverside.fm, sign up for free, and if you want to buy at the end of those 2 hours, this will get you 15% off. Big Podcast, that's the code, BIGPODCAST. Go to Riverside.fm, try it for free, and you get 15% off. Use the code BIGPODCAST, BIGPODCAST. We do this like an old school children's audiobook. I've got each of these articles on different pages, and when I flip that page, you're going to hear this sound. Here we go. My number one dream guest, but not anymore. Speaking of remote interviews, I did an interview with Dolly Parton this week. We did it via Zoom, although everything was recorded locally. They've got Dolly on set, high-res video, high-res audio. It was pretty surreal to connect to a session like this one. It was part of a larger press day for her. That's why we did it remotely. It's a normal Zoom link. When I logged in, there was a cartoon of Dolly on the screen. The still photo you might be familiar with in Zoom. And it's got the message, "Be right back." Then the engineer, who I've been talking with via text and also via chat right before that, she puts through Dolly's video and she is there. Big hair, makeup, 100% Dolly mode. The last episode of Build a Big Podcast. And this is how to get it. Go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe. That'll give you different options to listen, different options to subscribe. That talked about the pre-work that went into this. Until it happened, I didn't know it was going to happen. There's so much that can go wrong with scheduling. Like I said, this was part of a bigger press day for her. I don't know how many things she was doing, but it was a lot. It was a lot. I didn't have a lot of time with her. The whole thing, I was in and out in about 20 minutes. And I have no idea how long the interview actually lasted. I haven't played it back yet. It was just go, 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 go. As soon as she comes up on that screen until there's a 60-second card that pops up on your screen. It's like, yeah, wrap it up because we're moving on. That wasn't a shock to me. I've done a few of these. Strangely enough, one was with Rob Halford of Judas Priest. He's got a duet with Dolly on her new album. But as far as this one goes, Dolly was next level as far as her ability to work with whatever you threw out. She also gave me a complete interview. Like I said, there's that 60-second warning at the end. I asked a final question. I was going for it, man. I was going to get as much as I could out of it. She wrapped it up in a nice bow. I was like, wow, this is incredible. I connected with my producer afterwards. He was on the line too. And he's been with me throughout this whole journey. It was 2005 when we started this. We've done hundreds of shows together, a lot of these remote interviews. And we were like, wow, that was pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. It's what you would expect from a woman who is pushing 80. You've got very limited time. There's no room for error. As I mentioned, you start as soon as the guest comes on, and you go until the engineer gives you that 60-second warning message. I'm going to take you through this process. I'm going to share tape from the before, during, and after. That is coming up on Build a Big Podcast. If you want to make sure that you don't miss it, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. That's going to hopefully be in the next week or so. Like I said, I have not reviewed this tape. I'm planning on releasing it. It's more or less a complete segment. It is not enough for us to do an entire episode. Our episodes are 54 minutes, and I'm also going to talk about what to do when you've got just a little bit of a guest. Something like on one of these media tours, 10, 15, 20 minutes sometimes is all you get. And how do you expand on that to do a full episode? This is something that happens in the podcasting space, by the way. This isn't just celebrity stuff. This could be anybody in the business space that you're with. Gary Vaynerchuk does this a lot. Yeah, I got 10 minutes for you, that kind of thing. It could be that you run into somebody on a plane, in the airport, at an event, and you can't sit down for a full interview. How do you expand upon that? That's the kind of thing that I'm going to be talking about. Again, that's going to be in the next week or so, I hope. If you want it, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. That is how to do it. 3 links for you. You know the deal. I've got one for iPhone, one for Android. I've got an RSS feed there. I've got a QR code that you can scan. Go there right now before you forget, bigpodcast.com/subscribe, and I will take you behind the scenes on this, give you some advice on how to put your episodes together. Also get in on opportunities like this, because this is open to everybody. I mean, I did this from my closet, just like I'm talking to you here now. Spotify is going to clone podcasters' voices and translate them to other languages. This is a partnership between Spotify and OpenAI. It's going to let podcasters replicate their voices to automatically create foreign language versions of their shows. I've got mixed feelings about this. On one hand, it makes our podcast more accessible, which I think is always a good thing. But on the other, will the human element be lost? That humanity, little mistakes that you make, those awkward pauses. I don't know. With that said, some of these AI voices, just amazing. Have you heard Speech Key? I've got it linked. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Absolutely amazing, especially for the price. People getting in on this thing for like $59. It's like, whoa. This is the future, guys. This is the future. I don't think it's going to replace us. I think it could enhance us. But regardless, that's where things are headed. Even if we wanted to, we're not going to be able to stop the change. So we need to find a way to be able to work with it. And again, there are some really good things from making your podcast more accessible to people. I'd love to know your thoughts. If you want to reach out to me, the best way to do it, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. It's got all the social media, Pebble, Blue Sky, Mastodon, wherever you are, I am there. Let me know your thoughts. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. That has all the links to get in touch with me. The difference between interested and obsessed. Some sports stuff here. Stick with me, though. I'm not a sports guy. So if you're thinking, oh, God, sports, bear with me. This is worth it. The difference between interested and obsessed. Being obsessed with details and paying attention to them separates greatness from mediocrity. But surprisingly, the distance between the two isn't as much as people think. This is a short 3-minute video. I've got it linked, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Here's some key takeaways for you. I think you're going to relate to this, regardless of whether you watch the video. One is that rushing increases the chances of making mistakes. So take your time, be precise. You've probably gotten in a situation, maybe with an interview, where you're excited and you want to cut the guest off and go to the next question because you've got that perfect follow-up question. That's rushing things. We've got to be able to trust ourselves that when there's a natural pause in the conversation, we're going to think of that perfect response. We're going to think of that perfect follow-up question. If you're worried about a guest going too long, and that's a thing when you're running live. Well, don't. Not unless you actually are live. That's another one of the things, by the way, that I'm going to talk about with this Dolly situation. It is not like a normal interview where you've got a little bit of wiggle room. For us, when we do a 54-minute show, I might sit down with a guest for a couple of hours. And there'll be times in between where we're coming in and out of segments. All right, more when we come back, that kind of thing. We're taking breaks. I'm talking with the producer. Here's where to go next. I did not have that luxury when I was talking with Dolly. You've got 10, 15, 20 minutes, however long you've got. And you could talk to your producer if he's there. Mine was there. But that's taking away from talking with her. Sometimes you're in that mode. But most of the time as podcasters, we can go back and edit. Everything is time shifted. We don't need to rush. That's a huge thing for us to keep in mind, and it's going to make our podcast better. Second key takeaway, even small details matter. The smallest. Right now, I have my microphone plugged in and it's going through a few things before it gets to this point. The plug, where it plugs into the interface, it's going into a 1/4-inch cable. I used to use an XLR cable. It's a small detail. It's still got the signal down. But once I switched from the XLR to the 1/4-inch, it sounded better. It sounded better. Again, a small detail. You got to pay attention to notice that stuff. Because in this case, the signal's getting through. I'm still hearing myself. Just a little bit better, that 10% better. That's the whole thing about this video. The difference between interested and obsessed, the distance between the two, not that different. And the difference between your podcast being great and your podcast being average, not that different. Not that much. The big takeaway, establish and focus on the fundamentals of what you want to be great at. You want to be a great host, you need to get on the mic. It's not nearly as effective to get on Facebook and talk about hosting as it is to actually host. You want to be a great interviewer? Start doing interviews. Focus on the fundamentals. You don't need to worry about mics and cables and lighting and all the stuff that we have a tendency to get caught up in. The tech. Not about the tech, it's about the fundamentals. Next key takeaway, success comes from practicing with intention and purpose, paying attention to the small details that others may overlook. Again, if you want to be a better podcast host, get behind the mic and be a podcast host. If you want to be a better podcast host, listen to yourself through editing, through the playback of the final edit. These are fundamentals and you can go as deep into them as you want to. They never get old if you're paying attention, if you're looking for those little things that you can tweak. To sum this up, little details matter and don't rush it. Don't rush it. What could go wrong if you give your interview a little space to breathe? A guest goes on too long, you forget to follow up. A million things can go wrong, let's be honest. But we've got editing. And that gives you an opportunity to listen to yourself. That gives you an opportunity to do better the next time because you've learned from this opportunity. Again, getting behind the mic, that's what's going to make you a better podcaster. So you can see how this all connects. Give it space, get behind the mic, listen to yourself. Then trust yourself, giving it more space when you get behind the mic again, then listen to that. More information, a link to the video, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Google Podcasts is shutting down. They're replacing it with YouTube. Womp womp. Google Podcasts is going to shut down here. Does anybody care? No. Well, a couple people. But that's why it's shutting down, just a couple people. This is Google's third attempt to break into the podcasting space. I would love to see them do it because God knows we need something for Android users other than Spotify. Spotify is it. Where are you sending your Android users? I'm sending them to Spotify now. Used to send them to Google, but Google kept messing it up. Google kept shutting things down. And every time they do that, I've got to switch a bajillion links. So now, if you go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe, you're going to see Apple Podcast if you're on iPhone. And if you're an Android user, go to Spotify. That's the best option. Will it be in the future? I don't know. Maybe Google will get it 4 times the charm. All is not lost. Google still has a lot of money. They've got a lot of Android users. They're combining it with YouTube and YouTube Music. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Google does not knock it out of the park all the time. AdSense knocked it out of the park. Gmail knocked it out of the park. Google Bulletin, Google Glass, Google Plus. They fail more times than they succeed. But like us as podcasters, fix it in the edit. 4th time around, we'll see if it sticks. I want to know your thoughts on it. Also, where are you sending your Android users? Reach out to me, Pebble, Blue Sky, Mastodon. I've got all the links. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. How to edit with your ears. I've got some good editing advice from NPR for you. I think NPR does the best editing when it comes to what I will call hybrid, where there's an interview, but there's also narration on it. When it comes to complete narration, NPR is great at editing audio. I don't know that you need to listen to all of these elements that they have mentioned for every podcast episode that you do, but picking out just a couple of them could help your production in a big way. For example, making sure each episode has purpose and looking how the tension in your story, will they succeed? Will they not succeed? Looking at how that can either engage listeners or bore them. Anytime I do a documentary, I've got what they call a focus statement. When I'm interviewing an entrepreneur, for example, a business owner, will he succeed or will he not succeed? You're telling that story. Here's where he was. Here's where he is. But let's get into that sticky middle and take you back to that point, take you along for the highs and the lows of what it was like. Because some people think it's a straight line. Oh, this guy's a bajillionaire. He had a great idea. Now he's a bajillionaire. No. You're building that tension, releasing it a little bit when you need to release it, giving the audience a break, then screwing it down, taking it higher than it was previously. That's what makes a good episode. Here's some questions to ask yourself when listening. When did I tune out or get bored? When was I confused? What was the purpose of the story, and is the purpose clear? Again, this takes it back to that focus statement. Start with that. Sometimes I will do this at the very top of an interview even. If it's one of those entrepreneur interviews, for example, maybe, will this man succeed? Will this woman succeed? When did the story make clear, powerful points? When was the audio hard to hear or distracting? Is the audio misleading? Ken Barkus is an NPR senior editor. He notes this. He said, sometimes a bubbling brook sounds just like a leaking toilet. Are you using authentic audio? Are you doing something with your audio that might take away from your story, might take away from the voice of your guest? I've seen this happen a lot. People put in too many sound effects. And for me, working with musicians a lot, sometimes in the final edit, for example, maybe a musician that I'm interviewing will mention a song. Let's say it's Dolly Jolene. And she said, well, I wrote Jolene. And all of a sudden, in the background, Jolene comes on. And it's taken away from what Dolly is saying about the song. And for me, as a producer for that show, I said, whoa. We don't need to hear that song now. That's where that space can come in. Give it a little space. Let her finish the story. And then if you want to introduce a song or just play a segment of it just to bring people back to it. Oh, yeah, I know that song that she was talking about. That's when to do it. But don't do it at the same time. That's what I think we can learn from what he's saying. Is the audio misleading? Is anything essential missing? Is the story fair? Does the structure of the story make sense? What are the beginning and the middle? Do they lead towards the end? Do you need to have everything that you're saying in this story to get the point across? Speaking of music, and you can do this on Spotify if you're curious. This is a perfect example of it. Thriller by Michael Jackson. The #1 best-selling album in the history of music. It's not a greatest hits album. The #1 album was the Eagles' greatest hits. But the one that's not the greatest hits album, kind of should be though, Thriller by Michael Jackson. And if you go on Spotify, and if you look at Thriller 40th anniversary, I think it is, you will see an extended version of Thriller that's got a couple of extra songs on it. Why did they remove those songs from the original Thriller album? It wasn't because of lack of time. It wasn't because they couldn't have put them in there. They were already recorded. They were already ready, and they're great songs. It's because it didn't fit the album. Sometimes what makes the difference in your podcast, in an album, in a speech, in your book, it's the stuff that you leave out. You don't have to put every single thing in there. Less can be more. And if you think of it like this, we're talking about tension. Let's say you've got 5 minutes of tension, if we could even measure it like that. 5 minutes of tension in a 10-minute interview is a lot more tension per capita than 5 minutes of tension in a 30-minute interview. Don't dilute your tension. Don't dilute your space. Don't dilute your guest's words with extra stuff that doesn't need to be in there. Take it out. Don't be afraid to chop it out. But since we're talking about little fine details, think of it as somebody with a fine surgical blade. You don't necessarily need to take the axe to it. Could be a sentence here or there. But get to that next point. Be like a comic. Laughs per minute. If you can get 7 laughs per minute instead of 6, you're considered a funnier comic. It can be that subtle. You want the full list of things to listen for? I've got them written down. They're at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Book your podcast interviews with a point. That is the name of the software. It is only $29. Choosing the right time for your podcast interview the old school way. No, that's at least 3 messages. If you're lucky. What time zone are you on? Okay, something came up. I've got Don't do that. Don't do it. A point is an automated scheduling tool. It's going to help you with common scheduling problems, including time zones, including availability. It works with any calendar, Google Calendar, Microsoft Office Calendar. It works with Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Gmail, Outlook. You also get automated follow-ups. How many times are people standing you up or they forget time zones? There's a million things that could go wrong with an interview. This is going to lessen the effect of those things. And again, $29. I've got it linked, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Podcaster equals audio engineer. You didn't become a podcast host because you wanted to be an audio engineer. But here we are. It is very easy to get frustrated when we have guests that don't know software or equipment. But being able to guide your guests through these things, through the processes that we use to get a good recording on tape, or hiring somebody who can do this for you, because this can all be outsourced, that's going to make the difference between you getting something on tape, getting something great on tape, and maybe not getting anything at all on tape. I mentioned it a couple times on this episode. I interview musicians a lot. You would not believe some of the well-known musicians that I've interviewed, and I'm talking about artists, also studio players, they have recorded and performed with microphones for millions of people, millions of albums sold, thousands of successful shows, millions of people have seen those shows. Some of them don't know how to plug in a mic. And you think, what? You've been singing into mics for years. Decades even. What's the deal? Well, they're not engineers, man. They're musicians. They're singers. Podcasters, well, really radio hosts. Used to be this way too. You walk in the studio, there's a microphone, there's an engineer who's going to operate that microphone for you. All you needed to do was talk. All you needed to do was listen. Not that way anymore. One of the great things about COVID and the pandemic, we all started doing podcasting and radio from home. And because we were isolated, and because we didn't have those engineers around, we had to learn how to do it. Not everybody has had that luxury. So we cannot assume that just because we know how to do it, our guests are going to know how to do it either. Sometimes the guests that you interview, they are not professionals. They are regular, everyday people, but they've got a story that you want to get on tape. You got to be cool with them, man. I found the best thing you can do in these situations, if you're advising somebody on equipment, don't get technical, get them a USB mic. Samsung Q2U, that's a great model. ATR 2100 by Audio-Technica, a great model. Each of those maybe $60, $70. Maybe you want to send one to your guest, have your guest send it back. I don't know. But there are options that are not that complicated. It's like plugging in a mouse. Most people know how to do that. If you are on something that has an iOS app, Riverside has one, Zoom has one. If somebody doesn't have a mic or just doesn't know how to use the mic, the best thing you can do is get on that app, have them take the phone with them into a closet full of clothes. That's going to be a quiet space, going to absorb some of the sound, let them capture their voice clearly, and have them hold the phone up to their mouth. That is the best thing you can do. That's the deal that we're in. We are also audio engineers. If you want to get a good remote interview on tape, it's not just about asking questions. It's not just about listening. It is about guiding your guests through that process because you're doing it every day. They are not. I've got a funny joke about this. It's visual. So you're going to have to check it out at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. I'd love to know your tech stories, how you're working with guests. I'm on all the social media networks, and all those are linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Classified ads for you. Swell AI automates writing podcast summaries, articles, social posts, and more. You can manage multiple shows in one dashboard, build custom templates for each show, and it's automatically going to connect with Google Drive, Dropbox, and Zoom. So it's going to make your process flow so much more smoothly and quickly than it is now. Automated episode notes. How great is that? You can get started for free. I've got the link, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Audio Pen. This is a similar AI tool in that it works with your audio. It is the easiest way to convert messy thoughts into clear text, including podcast outlines. All you need to do is hit record, then start talking. So great for podcasters. I love this thing. I use it all the time. If you're doing social media content, something on LinkedIn, if you're doing blog entries, if you want a podcast outline, Audio Pen can do it. Get that brain fart, boop, pull up Audio Pen, blah, 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 talk into it, spits out a great outline. It's not just a transcript. It is organized so you can be ready to deliver a great podcast episode. You can check it out for free. I've got links, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. When you are ready, this is how I can help you even more. If you like the newsletter, if you like this podcast, I've got something called Big Podcast AMP. AMP stands for Audio Monetization Program. It's a personal coaching program for podcasters. It has been designed to help you do three things. 1, grow your podcast audience. 2, get people talking about your podcast. 3, make more money with your podcast. I've got all the details at bigpodcast.com/AMP, AMP, bigpodcast.com/AMP, AMP. Hey, thanks for listening. If you want to make sure you never miss an episode, and you do not want to miss this behind-the-scenes story of Dolly Parton, how we got that interview, how we recorded it, I'm giving you the unedited, unfiltered, backstage tape. Bigpodcast.com/subscribe. That is the link you want to go to. You want to subscribe to this podcast. I've got 3 links there, one for iPhone, one for Android, and one with an RSS feed. I've got a QR code that you can scan. This will make sure that you never miss an episode, including the behind-the-scenes, backstage, before, during, and after, play-by-play of getting this interview with Dolly Parton. Also, advice for you to do something similar, because there are a lot of artists, there are a lot of book authors, there are a lot of entrepreneurs doing these media tours. It is possible for you to do something very similar for yourself or be on the receiving end of that. I think people are intimidated sometimes about talking to a celebrity, somebody who's very successful, but those people have nothing without the media. It is radio, it is television, it is podcasting that make those people who they are. You're part of that. So don't be nervous about jumping in, being part of this if you want to be part of it. Bigpodcast.com/subscribe. That will get you connected to the story and more information about how you can do it yourself. Go there right now before you forget. Bigpodcast.com/subscribe. I will see you there, and I'll see you here on the next episode of Build a Big Podcast.